As the crowd simmered with fury, various thoughts bubbled up in the minds of the players. One plotted to rally the others against Ryu, another sought to ruin his reputation, while some quietly considered physical confrontations. A few even feared his rise to power as the new zone representative. All of them believed they had a chance to take him down. Ryu, perceptive as ever, caught on to their thoughts. His smirk deepened, amused by their futile schemes. They really think they stand a chance? How laughable, he mused, barely containing his inner chuckle. The crowd, seeing his smirk, became even more enraged. What, you think this is funny? One player shouted, while others hurled insults, calling him a psychopath for grinning after killing someone. The tension crackled in the air. Just then, a system notification flashed before everyone's eyes. Player Black Scythe has been designated the new zone representative. Silence fell over the crowd as they processed the news. It was as if they had just armed a predator. Someone dangerous was now in command. The air grew thick with uncertainty. No one knew what their next move should be. Ryu, still wearing his smug grin, mocked the crowd's sudden quietness. "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Why aren't you all shouting anymore? Scared now that I'm the zone representative?" His gaze swept over the uneasy faces. He taunted them further by casually mentioning command tokens, suggesting that those who hadn't undergone their class change were especially vulnerable. His words caused visible discomfort. Nervous murmurs rippled through the group. "What are you talking about?" one player finally stammered. Then, someone pointed at Ryu's name, noting that its color had shifted. "Look! Black Scythe's name has changed," they exclaimed. More players began to notice it as well, their confusion mounting. How had his name color changed, while theirs remained the same? Ryu stayed calm, his demeanor betraying his extensive experience. He knew exactly what was happening. With 100 regressions under his belt, he had encountered this situation before. He inwardly confirmed that his name had likely shifted from neon to red, a sign of the bloodshed he had caused. Breaking the silence, he explained the mechanics. "In rounds like this," he began, "your name turns red when you kill someone. The more people you take out, the darker the shade gets." His voice was matter-of-fact, as if discussing the weather. He continued, "The system separates those who've killed from those who haven't. Funny thing is, players tend to target killers first. It makes them feel better, like they're not the bad guy. But the irony is, once they kill a killer, they become one themselves. It's a vicious cycle, encouraging everyone to spill more blood." The crowd's fear deepened as his words sank in. They realized that by eliminating Ryu, they'd only be setting themselves up for the same grim fate, trapped in a spiral of violence. Ryu thought that their hesitation to kill now would only result in more deaths later. Frustrated by their inaction, he asked, "What are you all waiting for? There's no time to waste." Yet, instead of acting, the crowd remained angry, accusing him of being a murderer and demanding he stay put. Ryu couldn't help but marvel at their audacity, talking down to the #1 ranked player in the world like that. He decided to be blunt. "You're all making it sound like I'm the only one who ever planned to take out the zone representative. What about last time when everyone rushed to Jongshik? Were you planning to give him a hug?" His voice hardened. "This is survival. It's kill or be killed." Ryu found it baffling that they had made it this far without grasping such a basic truth. He urged them to drop the pretense and face the harsh reality. "If your life was on the line, you'd be pulling out a weapon to defend yourself too," he said, his gaze cold and serious. "This isn't the time for idle talk. If you've got a problem with me, let's settle it like we did last time, with a vote. But stop wasting time." Turning away from them, Ryu mused silently. Even if he kept quiet, they would inevitably start arguing amongst themselves. But by the time they realized what needed to be done, it might be too late. If he didn't push them to act now, they'd keep squabbling, and fewer than 521 would survive. He knew it was a gamble, stirring up conflict in the group, but it was the only way to save more lives in the end. His words, harsh as they were, might be the wake-up call they needed. Suddenly, a girl spoke up, agreeing with him. "Yeah, Black Scythe is right. We can't just sit around. We need to do something," she urged. A man quickly countered, challenging her. "Then what do you suggest? If you've got an idea, let's hear it." The tension in the air thickened as the crowd waited for someone to take the lead. The girl, clearly annoyed by the man's sarcastic tone, shot back, asking, "Why do you have to be so snarky? I'm just saying we need to figure something out." The man, undeterred, suggested they settle things with a one-on-one duel. However, another voice immediately challenged the idea, asking how fighting to the death could ever be considered fair. "You think this is just some game?" the person added, clearly frustrated by the lack of urgency. This sparked an argument between them, the tension rising rapidly. Nearby, Erin stood with her bodyguard, anxiety etched on her face. What should we do? She whispered, her voice shaky. Do we really have to kill someone, like Black Scythe said? The bodyguard, eyes cold, nodded without hesitation. If we don't, someone else will kill us, he replied firmly. It's them or us. I don't care who they are. Erin hesitated, her kind-hearted nature conflicting with the brutal reality before her. She remained silent, torn between survival and her conscience. The bodyguard, seeing her hesitation, turned to her with a serious look. Listen, Erin. You need to toughen up. Taking a life isn't easy, but in this game, it's necessary. If you hesitate, you're dead. Nervously, Erin asked, You talk like you've done it before, have you? The bodyguard shook his head, though his voice was resolute. No, I haven't. But I've thought it through. You need to get ready. This isn't going to be easy. Erin glanced at him uncertainly. Who should we go after? Let the situation decide, he replied. When the time comes, you'll know. Meanwhile, tensions within the group continued to escalate. One player snapped, urging someone else to stop wasting time and pick a target. But instead of complying, the person fired back, asking, What about you? Who are you going to target? Another player interjected, arguing that the best strategy was to focus on those with red names, since they'd already killed someone. They're the real threats, he reasoned. But this sparked more dissent, as someone else questioned who had the right to make such a decision. Fingers started pointing at Black Scythe, with accusations flying about how his red nickname only confirmed his reputation as a killer. Amidst the chaos, one person scoffed at the idea of targeting Black Scythe. You think we can take down someone at level 30? They asked, incredulous. We wouldn't stand a chance, even if all of us attacked at once. Another chimed in, doubting their ability to overwhelm Ryu. Even if we worked together, we couldn't overpower him. As the voices grew louder, a nervous player cautioned them to lower their voices, casting a worried glance in Ryu's direction. What if he overhears us? Ryu, wearing a scowl of irritation, silently noted that he could hear every word the group was saying. As his sharp gaze swept over them, a palpable wave of unease washed through the crowd. Some of them visibly tensed, avoiding his stare as if it burned. The tension was briefly broken by another player who, fed up with the heated chatter, spoke up. Is this really what we're doing? We can't just kill people, even if they've done wrong. Life's still life, he argued passionately, attempting to appeal to their dwindling sense of morality. A second player nodded in agreement. If we start killing murderers, what's the difference between us and them? We'd just be creating more killers. But another, more pragmatic, voice cut through the moral debate. Look, we need to focus on survival. We have to decide who's the real threat here, or none of us will make it. Someone else quickly chimed in, tired of the back and forth. Enough talking. We should just target those who've already crossed the line. They're the ones we need to take out. A girl, standing near the back, scoffed. And how exactly do you plan to do that? Line up all the criminals and ask them to raise their hands, she asked sarcastically, drawing a stifled laugh from a joker in the corner. One of the men, clearly irritated by her comment, turned to her with a sneer. Who the hell are you to make jokes? Either say something useful or shut up. He spat out a curse under his breath. The girl's face twisted in anger at the insult. Why are you swearing at me? Maybe I should kill you first, she snapped. The man smirked, unfazed. Go ahead and try, he challenged, his voice dripping with disdain as he hurled another curse at her. Before things could escalate further, the clown who had laughed earlier decided to jump into the fray. Why are you still running your mouths? We're here to fight, not bicker. Just get on with it already. The two arguing players immediately turned their frustration on the clown. You're just making things worse, one of them shouted. The girl, livid, pointed at him. People like you just love stirring up trouble, don't you? The clown's amusement vanished, replaced by fury. His eyes darkened as he summoned his weapon, snarling, I'll kill every last one of you if I have to. Not backing down, the girl quickly summoned her own weapon. Come on, then. If you're so tough, let's see what you've got. Ryu couldn't help but shake his head at the chaos around him. What a mess, he thought, watching the group argue without any real action. They were all bark, no bite. He figured they'd turn on each other eventually, it was only a matter of time. Just then, one man finally had enough. He stepped forward, demanding everyone stop shouting and get serious. But in that very moment, his expression shifted from frustration to pure shock. His eyes went wide, his jaw dropped. The reason? Yong Min, who Ryu had decapitated mere minutes ago, was casually standing up, yawning as if he'd just woken from a nap. The crowd froze, utterly dumbfounded, staring at him as if they'd seen a ghost. Well, in a way, they had. Ryu's eyes narrowed in realization. Because, that's the hidden rule for this round, he mused silently. After 10 minutes, anyone who dies respawns. Meanwhile, Young-min, completely oblivious to the stunned faces around him, looked confused. Why's everyone looking at me like I crawled out of a grave, he wondered. Then, his eyes landed on Ryu, piecing together what had just happened. Moments ago, he'd been talking to Black Scythe, but now? His mind raced, trying to figure it out. Suddenly, a man in the crowd broke the silence, yelling in disbelief, "He's alive again." Another player quickly jumped to conclusions, assuming Young-min had somehow gained divine power. But a more experienced voice among them chimed in, explaining it was likely a respawn feature of the game. The revelation spread through the crowd, sparking curiosity. Wait, does that mean anyone who dies will come back? A girl, standing nearby, shrugged and casually remarked, "Well, if that's the case, maybe killing isn't such a big deal after all." Her words seemed to flick a switch. People started gripping their weapons tighter, considering that if death wasn't permanent, maybe it was time to act. Amidst the growing tension, a nervous girl stepped forward, trying to calm the rising storm. She warned them not to rush into anything, pointing out that they didn't fully understand how the resurrection worked yet. But before she could finish, a figure emerged from behind her. Without warning, he slashed her across the back, silencing her plea for peace. As she collapsed, clutching her wound, the attacker loomed over her, sneering. "Why don't you die first, then?" he spat, his voice dripping with malice. He continued to strike, hurling insults with each vicious blow. The crowd, already on edge, tensed further as the violence erupted. The other players watched in horror, wide-eyed and trembling, as blood splattered everywhere. The assailant, drenched in crimson, stood panting like a predator fresh from the hunt, his weapon and appearance reminiscent of a bloodied wolverine. In the chaos, some players nervously muttered, "Come on, she'll respawn. We need to regroup," hoping that the girl's body would miraculously revive. But as the seconds dragged on, the unsettling realization hit them, she wasn't coming back. One jittery player, biting their nails in growing anxiety, whispered, "She's not respawning." Another nervously suggested that maybe it was just taking time. Young-min took about 10 minutes, right? "Let's give her a little more time," someone else added, clinging to hope. The group agreed, anxiously waiting. After what felt like an eternity, a soft, golden light began to surround the lifeless girl. Her clothes and wounds were restored, as if she'd never been touched. In a matter of moments, she stirred and slowly stood, stretching as if waking from a deep sleep. The onlookers were stunned, mouths agape at the miraculous sight. But as she fully regained her senses, a new realization hit her. She remembered everything. "Who did it? Who attacked me?" she demanded, her sharp gaze sweeping across the crowd. Silence followed. No one dared to speak. But just as the tension thickened, the man who had killed her earlier stalked toward her again, ready to strike once more. This time, however, before he could land the fatal blow, he sneered and proudly admitted, "It was me." But before his blade could reach her, a blur of movement sliced through the air. In an instant, a figure appeared behind the man, slashing his hand clean off, sending him crumpling to the ground. Blood sprayed as the killer fell lifeless, his arrogant grin frozen on his face. The victorious figure, grinning widely, pointed at the fresh corpse. "So, they really do come back after 10 minutes, huh?" he said, almost mockingly. Yet, despite knowing this, the group couldn't hide their disgust. Some players looked visibly sick, their stomachs turning at the carnage unfolding around them. Ryu, watching silently, noted that while the reality of resurrection had been confirmed, it didn't make the sight of murder any less unsettling. People were horrified, but Ryu knew better. In chaotic situations like these, it didn't take long for people to show their true nature. Chaos soon erupted. With the newfound certainty of resurrection, players started turning on one another. A man suddenly rushed forward, stabbing someone from behind, the crowd quickly devolving into a frenzied bloodbath. In the midst of the frenzy, another player, apparently having given up on any sense of morality, sliced through someone from behind without hesitation. The chaos around them only intensified as players turned on each other. Amidst this, a heated confrontation broke out, with one man managing to block an incoming attack. "You've all lost your minds," he shouted in disbelief. One player, recently stabbed, hurled insults at his attacker, but the stabber, oddly calm, apologized, claiming he had no personal vendetta. However, in a twist, the wounded player immediately retaliated, slashing at his attacker. "How about you feel what it's like?" he spat, though the other man blocked the blow, urging his opponent to stop fighting and accept his fate, since they would both respawn anyway. The wounded man, not backing down, retorted coldly, "Then why don't you go first?" Before the other could react, he struck him down, ending his life. The scene spiraled into utter madness. Players attacked one another relentlessly, their shouts filling the air. Some begged for mercy, while others screamed in agony as blood painted the ground. The battlefield had become a gruesome spectacle of violence, with no end in sight. Watching the carnage unfold, Ryu noted how the mass of players, now over 1,000 strong, had descended into an animalistic fight for survival, no different from stray dogs tearing at each other. The sight reminded him of a war zone. Quietly, he summoned his scythe, a crimson glow flickering around his hand as the weapon materialized. It was time for him to enter the fray. The moment Ryu began to move, everything changed. His mere presence sent a ripple through the chaotic battlefield. Combatants froze in their tracks, their attention shifting as Black Scythe approached. With a single, sweeping motion, Ryu unleashed his power, and a wave of red energy sliced through the air, cutting down everyone in his immediate vicinity. The ground was suddenly littered with corpses, blood pooling around him as the deadly quiet settled. But Ryu wasn't done. He sensed 3 individuals attempting to ambush him from behind. Before they could even launch their attack, he dispatched them in an instant, his presence detection skill making their feeble attempts laughable. They didn't stand a chance. Scanning the battlefield, Ryu's eyes landed on a man wielding a massive, double-sided axe, laughing maniacally as he took down his foes with brutal swings. Ryu smirked to himself, knowing that the man's rampage wouldn't last much longer. As Ryu observed the chaos around him, he quietly acknowledged that this 4th round was tailor-made for Black Flame Dragon. With the absorption rune in his possession, this stage was practically a banquet for him. From the deep hue of Black's name, Ryu deduced that the man had already eliminated about 10 players. He figured Black would likely have to make use of the stack few times, considering the pace of his rampage. Black couldn't contain his amusement, glancing at his status window in sheer delight. Each player he took down caused his stats to skyrocket, and he was reveling in it. Sure, it was normal to grow stronger from slaying monsters, but the unexpected boost from eliminating other players? That felt like hitting the jackpot. The absorption rune worked by increasing a stack each time an enemy was defeated. Once the stack was full, a random stat would be added, and the size of the boost depended on the level of the defeated player. Armed with this knowledge, Black was like a predator on the hunt, grinning wickedly as he sought out his next target, eager to cut down as many as he could. Each time his status window updated, showing the steady growth of his stack, he couldn't help but wonder if it was due to the high level of his victims. His most recent kill was around his level, and the stack jumped significantly. That made him think, what would happen if he managed to take down Black Scythe himself? The thought of filling his stack instantly and gaining new abilities flashed through his mind, but he quickly dismissed it. Going after someone of Black Scythe's caliber could lead to disastrous consequences, and he wasn't eager to tempt fate. Instead, he decided to stick to weaker players, using them as stepping stones to grow even stronger. Spotting another player nearby, he swiftly moved in, delivering a lethal strike from behind. As his blade cut through his unsuspecting opponent, Black murmured under his breath, "Nothing personal." Pulling his bloodied weapon free from the lifeless body, he chuckled to himself, feeling a strange sense of relief wash over him. The chaos, the bloodshed, it was all an outlet for his pent-up aggression, and it felt oddly therapeutic. Recalling the trouble Jongsik had caused in the previous round, Black Flame Dragon's grin widened. He couldn't shake the feeling that this round was designed perfectly for him. Just then, he sensed movement behind him. Someone was trying to sneak up for an ambush. Without missing a beat, Black Dragon sidestepped the incoming attack, raising his weapon overhead. As he readied his strike, he mused inwardly about how most players gain nothing from eliminating each other. But for him, it was different. His stats surged with every kill. With a swift, clean cut, he took down his would-be attacker. But me? I get stronger every time I bring someone down, Black muttered to himself, barely breaking stride. As players started respawning, he observed with a smirk. And the best part? My prey just keeps coming back for more. His eyes fell on a girl who had just reappeared, her expression barely registering her new reality before he cut her down again, blood spraying across the ground. As he wiped the blood from his weapon, he wondered how many he'd killed by now. He had lost count but knew that the more he eliminated, the higher he would climb on the leaderboard. His ambitions were crystal clear, eliminate everyone he could to secure the top spot. However, his momentum came to an abrupt stop when he found himself face to face with Ryu. Ryu advanced toward him, and in an instant, the air around them shifted. With a single move, Ryu unleashed his skill, Night of Death. The sky turned unnaturally dark, casting an eerie shadow over the battlefield. Black blinked, bewildered by the sudden shift, and noticed that other players around him were just as confused, eyes darting toward Ryu in shock. Something about Ryu's scythe caught Black's attention, it was becoming transparent, almost ghostly. Alarmed, Black quickly realized he needed to be on guard. But before he could react, a red hue filled his vision, and suddenly, he felt weightless. His world spun, the ground seemingly flipping as he found himself airborne. It was only as his severed head tumbled through the air that reality hit him. Ryu's strike was flawless, severing Black Flame Dragon's head cleanly from his body. The head hovered momentarily in the air, spinning upside down before gravity took over. Despite the brutal end, Black felt surprisingly calm. After all, it was Ryu, Black Scythe, who had taken him down. As his vision dimmed, Black reflected on his mistake, realizing that crossing paths with Ryu had been a miscalculation. He would respawn soon, but next time, he'd be more cautious. Elsewhere on the chaotic battlefield, the sound of clashing swords filled the air, accompanied by shouts, curses, and the endless struggle for survival. In the midst of this chaos, Yongmin stood back, quietly observing the carnage. His attention shifted as a figure beside him suddenly resurrected, rising from the dead after 10 minutes had passed. So it's true, Yongmin thought with a twisted grin. People really do come back. The rules of the game were now clear to him. This wasn't just survival, it was a chance for revenge. His mind raced as he realized the opportunity before him. He could take out everyone who had betrayed him. Clenching his fist, he smiled wider, resolved to settle old scores. Walking through the battlefield where players ruthlessly slaughtered one another, Yongmin scanned the chaos, his eyes seeking one specific person, Kim Sung-han. A predatory grin formed on his face when he finally spotted him. There, trembling and wide-eyed, Kim stood frozen amidst the violence. "Look at this idiot," Yongmin chuckled to himself, watching Kim visibly quake with fear, terrified over the prospect of a stat penalty. Yongmin couldn't resist. Laughing, he waved dramatically to catch Kim's attention. When Kim turned and saw him, his confusion was palpable. Without warning, Yongmin sprinted toward Kim and landed a brutal punch to his face, sending him crashing to the ground. As Kim cradled his face in shock and pain, Yongmin stood over him, smirking. "Good to see you again, you coward," he sneered. Kim, dazed and in agony, could hardly comprehend what had just happened. But as he lay there, trembling, the grim reality hit him. Yongmin sneered as he called Kim's name again, yanking him up by the collar. His voice dripped with malice as he mocked, "Didn't you say you'd finish me off if we ever met again? Well, here I am. Give it a shot." Before Kim could respond, Yongmin landed another vicious punch. Kim's screams echoed across the battlefield, filled with pain and fear. Satisfied, Yongmin let go of him, his voice relaxed as he murmured, "Refreshing." With a dark, brooding aura, Yongmin scanned the chaos, his thoughts shifting to the other former comrades who had betrayed him. His thirst for revenge was far from quenched. If there was a hell, he thought, it would look something like this, a killing field drenched in blood, where mercy no longer existed. A place where every soul was trapped in a cycle of brutal violence and endless suffering. Among the turmoil, Erin was on her knees, clutching a knife that dripped with blood. Her breathing was ragged as she watched bodies fall around her, but her eyes were distant, her mind on the verge of collapse. The bodyguard, dispatching enemies with grim efficiency, noticed her fragile state. Walking over, he asked with mild concern, "You tired?" Erin shook her head weakly. "Not tired," she replied, her voice trembling. "Just struggling." It wasn't her body that was exhausted, it was her mind. She was barely holding on. The bodyguard silently assessed her, thinking to himself that while he could endure, it was Erin's mental state that worried him. If she couldn't pull herself together, it would impact their mission, and worse, he wouldn't be able to face the CEO. Just then, something caught his attention. A man had crept up behind Erin and grabbed her by the hair, yanking her head back. He raised his weapon, ready to strike. Without hesitation, the bodyguard sprang into action, closing the distance in an instant. Disarming the attacker with a swift movement, he sneered, "Like hell I'd let scum like you touch her." With a smooth motion, he plunged his blade into the man's chest. The attacker crumpled to his knees, gasping in agony. Turning back to Erin, the bodyguard spoke coldly. "Finish him." Erin's hands trembled as she stared at the man struggling before her. Fear and hesitation gripped her, but she knew there was no other choice. Steeling herself, she forced her feet to move, rushing forward. With a determined cry, she plunged her knife into the man's heart, ending his suffering. We must conclude for today. If you enjoyed this part and want to see what happens next, please like and subscribe. Thank you.